Good morning, David Lapp here, coming to you live from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Today is Saturday, May the 3rd, 2025. Today I want to talk about starting where you're at. Sometimes you have to dare to start small and then watch God do the impossible. And, looking through the Bible, there's all kinds of scriptures that relate to starting small, to like with the mustard seed, with David's sling or the widow's oil, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Start with what you have. You don't have to wait until you have a huge thing to bring it to God in order for Him to use that. But it's using what you have. It's starting with what you have and being faithful in that, and then allowing God to work through that. The kingdom of God is advanced through multiple small acts of faithfulness, of following God, of taking those next steps. I think back to Blessings of Hope of how we started in a 3-car garage and what it is today, and all the changes that happened along the way. But if we would have waited to start until we had everything figured out, until we would have felt qualified, or we look back and there, I mean, even today, there's so many things that we don't feel qualified to do, but we recognize that if we stay connected to God, we keep our yes with God, and we keep saying, taking the steps that are in front of us, and we allow God to work out the details, there's so much more that could happen than if we try to, figure everything out. Or, yeah, we want to be responsible, we want to be faithful, but sometimes stepping out in faith and taking that next step, uh, sometimes that is not what we believe, uh, or what common, if you think of common sense, sometimes what God calls us to doesn't always line up with what the popular opinion would be. And we might think it looks insignificant, but a small step of trusting God, a small step of being faithful, you never know the significance of that. And sometimes we just have to start somewhere and let God do the impossible. Uh, as we go through life and we're sowing seeds, we are stepping out in faith. uh, don't compare your seed to somebody else's harvest. Just because somebody else is harvesting something that you're hoping to harvest in your future, what the way I would see it is, if somebody is the Bible talks about seed time and harvest, and just because somebody is harvesting something that they sowed for in their past, doesn't mean that you need to harvest that today. Sometimes we tend to want to plant a seed and then go out the next day and look for the harvest, where if you plant a seed, it takes time for the harvest to grow, to appear. And just staying faithful in planting those seeds, staying faithful in taking the next steps that God shows us, and allowing the allowing the harvest to come in God's timing. Just trusting God to a deep level can feel scary. It can feel like you're out of control, and you actually are, because you have turned control over to God. But if you're able to believe that God has a plan and believe that God is with you in the process, then why not trust Him to a deep level? I mean, there's times where we look back, and if we would have tried to figure this out on our own, we would have came out with a different answer. But just being able to take the step that was in front of us today, and the Bible talks about to take no thought for tomorrow, but to sufficient of the day of the evil is the evil thereof, or something like that. But it's something about going through life and believing that God has a plan and walking in that plan. So, yeah, do I always get it right? Yeah, probably not. But to the best of my ability, uh, my goal is to walk where God called me to walk, and to do that faithfully. And sometimes taking the next step, if you don't see the big picture, we don't have to see the big picture if we are connected to the one that sees the big picture. And there's times where things come up, and sometimes the only option is to pray and say, Lord, how do we handle this situation? How do we get through this? And it's I don't know. It's just been an interesting journey to be able to walk in that. And another thing, to keep in mind as you're sowing, as you're starting somewhere, maybe the seed that you're sowing is the answer that somebody else was praying for, and you never know the ripple effect of what that'll bring. Is is the something, if you start something in faith and you keep walking in that, uh, what's God going to do with that? We don't know. But we look back over our life, we look back over the last 20 years of our lives, and where we were to where we are today, it's just amazing at what God has done. Would we've been able to figure that out on our own? Absolutely not. There is no way that we could have gotten to where we're at by coming up with a strategic plan or there's just so many God moments along the way that if we would have tried to figure this out on our own, there is absolutely no way it would have happened. But we look at what we think is impossible, we turn that over to God, we put our faith behind it, and we say, Lord, what is possible? And then we let the details up to God, because if God's in it, He has a plan, and He's able to help us to get through it. And the fact of the matter is, if God's not in it, then I would rather not be in it either, because there's so many things that God is doing on the earth today that we don't need to get involved in things that are outside of what God is doing. If we can trust God every step of the way, and take those small steps, or what can seem like insignificant steps, and let's watch God do the impossible, because there is so much opportunity out there to make an impact on this world for God's glory. And there is so much, step by step, what can we do if we allow God to do it? But there is so much opportunity to just share a smile, share a word, share encouragement with people that you meet every day, that you have no idea how that will impact their lives. But yeah, I thank you for being a part of what I'm doing here, just sharing my heart with you this morning, and be happy to answer any questions. If you have questions that you would want me to address, or topics you want me to talk about, feel free to fill out the link in my description here, and I'd be happy to address that in another episode. But let's start somewhere. We may not be able to see the whole picture, but can we see a piece of it? And we know God is behind it. We know God is in it, and start taking that step.